Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Beyond Max Q. I'm Mollie Jahner, your host, and I am joined today by Jessie Casner. I'm so excited to have you on. She is the CXO of the Thoughtful Company, and I love the title CXO because I think CRO, CMO, CFO, COO, all the titles, but the Chief Experience Officer brings all of it together. And it's really about storytelling and managing that story and brand. And I know you've done that in your past and you're doing it now. And you guys are doing some really cool things. And so, with that, I would love for you to introduce yourself a little bit and tell the audience who you are and what you're doing.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Molly. It's great to be here. Yeah, a little bit about me and what we're working on right now. I've had sort of a circuitous path to getting into what is now real estate. I spent a lot of time in small to medium sized businesses, a lot of startups down here in San Diego, cutting my teeth with very limited budgets, big expectations, and really small, nimble teams who have to execute a lot with not a ton. For
Translation, she's a miracle worker.
I think anybody who can make it work in a startup is a little bit of that miracle worker, a little bit of that magician. It just takes, I mean, you have to be a little bit brave, a little bit dumb, like,
A little
put
bit
it all
crazy.
together.
Yeah, I love it.
Exactly. So I've spent a lot of time honing those sorts of skills and just having faith that with the right system and the right plan, and the right team, ultimately the right people by your side, you can kind of execute anything. Um, we've met my co-founder and we've been working together for almost 10 years now. I think for me, more than anything, when I talk about people, it's really about finding that business partner, certainly for us, that complements your skill set, that, is the yin to the yang and can really, where we can sit and we can kind of sit in that conflict and we can have those tough conversations. And ultimately, what comes out is not friction, but something better than what we went in with. Over the last 10 years, James Cho, my co-founder, and I have spent a lot of time working with other companies. So we've done a lot of third-party work consulting on go-to-market and narrative building across all sorts of industries. We've built products. We've brought those products to market. We've built our own companies. We've taken those to exit. We, in our last acquisition, ended up at a publicly traded NASDAQ company. I was chief marketing officer for that company, which encompassed a lot of the narrative building and a lot of that communication and that ultimate experience building that we talked about just a second ago, which was a really wonderful experience. I think after that and after I left Flora and I had some time to sort of look back and take a minute to reflect on where I had been and what I had done and who I had worked with. Um, you know, I think so much of where we spend our time, especially at this age and at this stage in life, I have two young kids.
Let's hear you say
Um,
at this age, and I'm just like, "Oh, I feel it." I'm like, "Oh, this age."
Right? It's like it's the funkiest age. It's you have the absolute most going on, but you are 100% in your professional prime. You, like, almost have enough energy to do everything, and even if you don't,
But
you're
not
doing it.
quite.
Yeah, but you're doing it anyway. So much of my time is spent, thinking about my kids and my family and where we want to live and what we want that community to look like. Um, we're lucky enough we have a couple of rental properties, so a lot of my time is spent working with my property manager and making sure that we're finding the great tenants because we know it's important to our neighbors and it's important to us. So all of that kind of came together once I had a chance to take a step back from a very intense job on public markets, to take a step back and say, like, what's really important. And I think James was in a similar situation, and we were going back and forth and looking at the way that the entire industry was built and sort of who it was in service of.
Mhm.
And I think it was clear to both of us that it was certainly not in service of a homeowner.
Right.
Um, and and we were kind of scratching our heads that, like, why is the dream to own a home, and then why is it so hard and not a lot of fun, quite honestly, for most people to own a home? You're just buying a bunch of problems in so many cases with no support, no guidance, no nothing. And so
But
ultimately
hey,
that.
Now you can have a 50-year mortgage, so
What could go wrong with paying, like,
for 50 years.
120% of the total actual value of the house on the day that you bought it? It's there's so many things out there that seem like they're great ideas, seem like they are in service of a homeowner, but when you really put that lens of what is truly the best experience, and that's the way that I'm
Mhm.
looking at everything now, we just saw a lot of flaws, and so that's what we're building at Thoughtful, and that's where we ultimately came to, which is homeowners deserve a for us, what we believe, a collection of trusted brands that they can go to that help support them through the entire homeownership journey. So you're not doing this alone. You're not relying on your handy uncle to come over and fix everything, whether or not he's qualified to do it or not. We really want to be that partner in the entire journey from the day that you start looking for a home till you're looking to finally remodel that kitchen because you've been in your house for 20 years and it's time, and then ultimately all the way through to selling it if that's what you choose to do, later down the road. So that's what we spend a lot of time thinking about. That's where we ended up after, cannabis and sports and all sorts of other industries. Like I said, we've touched it all, but I think right now, we couldn't be in a better industry right now. It's so primed for some love and attention.
I mean, we talked about that the first time we met, because we were in the process of selling our house, and it was just so tough, like, because it's such an old school profession in a lot of ways, and it hasn't necessarily come into the 21st or whatever AI century. And so, how are you guys changing that? And also, how are you changing perceptions? Because it's not just homeowners. How are you working with real estate agents?
Yeah, absolutely. The way we've looked at it is it's a little bit like what Expedia did to travel, where you used
Mhm.
to go through a travel agent and they would kind of send you everything. You get a couple of pamphlets or something and you just, pick off of pictures and you don't know what kind of kickback they're getting from the resort. So is it the best resort or are they getting the best
That's
commission
true.
for it? And ultimately, and this is not, I don't want to paint with such a broad brush that this is all agents, but their incentive is to get you into a house, right? And we look at it a lot from the buyer's perspective because the market, certainly here in California, is such that you could put almost any house on the market and it'll sell within 30 days here in California. But certainly from the buyer's perspective, what are you really getting into? It's going to be your burden, and it's not just the mortgage, it's not just the property tax, it's not just the insurance, but it's the next 3 to 5 years of correcting all the deferred maintenance. It's the 60-year-old pipes in your house. It's the fact that we heard the story the other day. Somebody was about to move into a house, like they're about to put in an offer on a house that was across from a Superfund site, and they were gonna raise their young kids there. And for some people, they're not worried about that. For other people,
Where all
they're
these
worried.
tomatoes are growing so huge. I wonder why.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but there's these things that, sometimes you have to wonder, is it in the industry's best interest to share all this information with a buyer, or is it in their best interest to get you into the home and get you into the biggest home with the biggest mortgage that you can possibly bear, because that's where the incentives lie. Not that that's where people's intentions always lie, but that's certainly where the incentives are. And so our question has become, where can we put some power back and more data, honestly, back
Mhm.
into the hands of home buyers, shoppers, owners, and make them feel more empowered and confident in the decisions they're making. Maybe you're buying that house anyway, but at least you know going into it what you're getting. So, what we're
Yes.
working on right now is a couple of things. So one is self-represented home buying. A lot of people have focused on for sale by owner. That
Yes.
transaction is a little bit more straightforward. You have a line of people who are ready to come and buy your house. Will you let them in? Yes, no. You know, you find somebody who has, the dollar amount that matches your, what you want to get out of it. From a buyer's perspective, it's really opaque, that whole process. Nobody's quite sure how to navigate it. So in that sense, I understand why people want to rely on a buyer's agent, but I think there's sort of two things that fall flat in that relationship. One is the whole process is relatively rote. right? NAR has been very good about defining the forms and the process that need to get done. As long as you can secure your mortgage, you can get your insurance, there's a title and escrow company in line to be able to handle all the transfer of that money.
Mhm.
Everything else is pretty linear. Um, so how much support do you need? Sometimes you want neighborhood intel, sometimes you want home value intel, but again, are you getting the full context of that property to really inform if the value matches the asset that you're getting? So I think that falls a little bit flat. And then from the agent perspective, these buy side agents are investing so much time, often, their own money to drive you around on a Saturday to look at 10 houses. It has 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. That's everything you need, but there's all these other deal breakers that they didn't qualify you for in the beginning, right? And once you walk in and you fall in love, and then you find out that, well, the roof's gonna need to be replaced, and also it's across from that Superfund site. And you're like, "Well, if I would've known, I wouldn't have even toured it. I wouldn't have fallen in love with the house," right? And so at the end of it, even if your buyer's agent is getting that 3% commission
Mhm.
paid by the seller, which is ultimately paid by the buyer because it's priced in,
Yeah.
um, that poor realtor is hardly making anything. When
Yeah.
you really account for all of the time that they put into that relationship building and driving you around and everything. So I think those are 2 areas where it really falls flat. And so what we're suggesting is that if we can surface some of that data and
Mhm.
intel that everybody else has, that it's really just the buyers that don't have it. If we can surface that information sooner, if we could give you easily digestible information on the general quality of the home,
Mhm.
permits that have been pulled for additions or upgrades or whatever else. If there are any environmental factors that you should be aware of, any climate risk factors, safety, neighborhood safety scores, sex offender lists, like all of those things that as a home buyer you want to know. And we could manifest that really quickly and easily upfront before you even think about touring a home.
Mm.
And perhaps that's manifested in a really simple and easily digestible score so you can more easily compare home A and home B beyond square footage and
Yeah.
bathroom. What does that do for the very specific phase of discovery and evaluation,
Mhm.
in comparison? And then once you get over that hump, then you're only touring homes that really make sense for you and your family based on what is
Yes.
most important to you. Um, and I think that has meaningful implications for a buyer, obviously, but even an agent, right? If they could use this tool to
Yeah.
really dive deep with their client on a
Mhm.
first time call and say, "Great, I'm only showing you 3 houses." And that's where we're gonna
Well,
start because
it's
those are
good
the
for
only ones that
sellers too. I mean, I can't tell you what an effort it is to get out of my house. First of all, clean it, make it really beautiful. I have 3 little kids, so it's like, okay, this is a nightmare keeping this clean. Like, and then run and get out, only to have like a looky loo be like, it wasn't worth it. And I was like, well, that's a wasted hour of my time plus all the time spent cleaning it.
completely, completely. Like, could we get just like better matching between buyers and sellers? And agents will always play a role, in the same way that I have a great friend who's an exceptional travel agent. She
Mhm.
doesn't do it for like people like me, or like I'll go stay in like, kind of a dingy hotel as long as there's a great beach nearby, you know, like for people who really want that high touch experience,
Yes.
everything handled for them, that's always going to exist. And so I think there is this balance between putting data and information in the hands of the buyers so they can make an informed decision and then start to evaluate how they want to engage with the industry, with these professionals, if at all, if it makes sense. And then you're respecting everybody's time, everybody's dollars. And ultimately, I think you get just a better industry that flows better, that functions better, that, isn't doesn't feel like it's based on these misaligned incentives, that you really start to get people on the same page. Um, and that's ultimately our hope. And then obviously after the after you buy your home, how do you maintain it? How do you take care of it? How do you know what to do, when to do it? Um, how do you know if a $50,000 kitchen upgrade is really gonna give you the ROI you want in the long
Yeah.
term? And again, maybe you wanna spend 100K and you don't care because you want the best of the best.
Sure.
At
Yeah.
least you know.
But then people are like, "Well, what's the Zestimate?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but that number is so like." Not to diss on Zillow because I think it's a fabulous company and I love all the cool things they do, but
Sure.
I
Yeah.
will say that the Zestimate seems really arbitrary, and I
Yeah.
don't know how they're actually calculating that number.
Well, and it's all, it's the same way that your realtor would do it, which is based on comps, which is, well, another 3 bedroom, 2 bath, 3 doors down sold for this doesn't really meaningfully take into account all of the other things that are important to know about that property. And
Exactly.
there is really high level, and that's always their caveat. But
Yes.
I think there's just a more intentional way to get to what the essence of the estimate is, but get it closer to what the reality of that asset is, because that's ultimately what you're buying. Is
That's
both a
exactly
lot of
right.
here until you sell it, but if you treated it like an asset, then you really get to reap the rewards of the promise of what everybody has told consumers real estate is supposed to afford them.
That's exactly right. No, I love that. I love what you guys are building, and I think it's so needed, and I love the experience piece because it speaks to your whole history, it speaks to what you guys are building now, and I you talked a little bit in your intro about how you guys have worked together for so long. There are a lot of co-founder dynamics in our community. I would love for you to talk a little bit about why what you guys have works, and I know you kind of found each other, but, like, what advice would you give for a founder looking for a co-founder?
Yeah, so when James and I met, we met through we were both running our own independent agencies. I was working with small to medium-sized founder-led businesses to really help them formalize their marketing foundations.
Mhm.
So, most of them are product people, or they're operations people, but they're not storytellers. They're not narrative builders. They're not value proposition identifiers. So my business partner then and I were really focused on that. James had an agency where he was doing a lot more of like the end to end go to market. So they were doing a lot of the creative. They did a lot of product development. And so we were introduced by a mutual sort of uh, client friend. We were both sort of working with him. Um, and so if I'm gonna suggest anything, it's sort of like dating. Like if if you can get introduced to somebody who has like a stamp of approval by somebody else that you know and trust,
Yeah.
there's kind of no better start to the relationship because aside from my husband, he is James is the person that I spend the most time
Yeah.
talking
You talk
to,
to all the
and
time.
right? And especially in a startup, I mean, it is.
And dealing with conflict.
Yeah. Yeah, and the ability to sort of create that common language, know that you're both working in service of what is best for and, not just the business. I think the lens that we look at it through is the best possible experience for our customer, whoever that, if somebody was handed this today, best possible experience. And so we have different ways of attacking that. We have different ways of thinking about that. There's certainly different ways to get to that same endpoint. But I think when you can look across the table and trust that the intentions are aligned, that more than anything, that's kind of the most important part, right? Trust is, I think, the biggest part of James and I's relationship. Um, because startup is messy, and even for us who are both pretty type A, right? We do everything by the book, things are outlined, like, there's still a lot of trust that when somebody says that they're gonna be with you for the long haul on this, that
Mhm,
they're show up and do this every day, um, that you can trust that they're gonna be there and that we are looking out for each other's best interests as
mhm.
well as best interest of our customers. So, um yeah, I think my advice is if you can find an introduction from somebody else, great.
Yeah.
I think also the thing that I really appreciate about James and something that I've really tried to internalize and make a part of my process, but is just his general curiosity.
Mm,
We've walked down 1,000 roads thinking about what industries we would want to attack and how we could attack it, what business we could build around it. And we've taken 10 steps down the road. We've been, hours away from signing a PO for like 6 figures to get a product produced, and then ultimately decided, like, now's not the right time. This even if we get this product, it's just not it. It's gonna fall flat. We're gonna be,
mhm,
muscling this the whole way. But that curiosity to, like, walk something all the way down the road to really dig in and understand it has been so helpful for me. And like I said, also internalizing that and trying to make it a part of my process as well. So learning from him and going off and learning on my own, and then seeing how we've both kind of synthesized all of that information, and ultimately, I think hopefully spit out something better on the other end, has been something really that I've really appreciated as we've
Mhm.
gone through building multiple businesses together. So
Well, and multiple businesses. So you've talked about your serial entrepreneur. You have rental properties, you've built businesses, you've exited multiple times, you've been publicly traded. You worked for, I mean, that's not an experience that most founders have the opportunity to participate in. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, especially the exit piece. Like, did you have that in mind when you were building, or did it just happen, or what would you do differently if you had to do it again?
So the company that we had built was Vessel, and that's where James and I really kind of came together more formally as opposed to kind of trading clients back and forth. So that was it was in the cannabis industry, which both of us had consulted in, but this was our first venture formally as our own project in the cannabis industry. Super highly regulated. Also kind of feels like the Wild West, which was a strange dichotomy. Um but, we were a small, lean team. We had only raised a little bit of money, especially in terms of cannabis, because we weren't plant touching. That was something that we were really focused on, which was, how do we address the cannabis industry and not the
Mhm.
California industry, right? So we
Right.
we built the picks and shovels. We were all of the accessories that you would need to consume. James designed some of the most beautiful product that's in the industry. It's still a brand. It's still out there. People still love it. So I think we got some good stewards of the brand after we left, but, working through, I think, highly regulated, was one piece of it, and learning how you navigate that,
Mhm.
how you overcome. I mean, there were a ton of industry headwinds, even like from a consumer perspective. There were a couple of, things that happened in the industry that made consumers sort of distrustful of
Mhm.
some of the players in the industry. So how do you overcome that? So there was a lot of that headwind. In addition, right, we didn't have any of our usual levers to be able to communicate with people. We couldn't advertise on social.
Right.
We got away with advertising on Google for a little bit, which was great because it helped us build our fan base. So we were able to spend like six figures for a couple of months on
Wow.
Google and just like acquired as many customers as we possibly could. And then all of a sudden, like they just shut off the the faucet. And we were like, okay. So we had to go from almost 100% paid acquisition to 100% organic literally overnight.
Oh my gosh.
And so, another one of those challenges where it wasn't something that we could have necessarily foreseen because
Sure.
we'd had the rubber stamp all the way along. Nothing's wrong. It's fine.
Yeah.
So having to pivot so quickly again, like those things that just really God
Mhm.
teach you about like what you're made of and how like a team can really rally together. That was
Mhm.
really fun because we went from our standard units were like 100. I think we were selling $120 when we started, and we were paying out the nose to acquire customers, but because we had to get the
Right.
flywheel
Yeah.
spinning. And
I get it.
so
I'm another marketing person, so I totally understand that. Some people are like, "Oh, what?" No, it's like, no, sometimes that's what you have to do to get momentum.
yeah, exactly, and knowing that we had a product where we were going to have multiple SKUs coming out over years, we were gonna expand the product line, that if we could just get them into the ecosystem,
Mhm.
we knew that we could drive that lifetime value way up. So, paying $250 for $150 sale would make sense in the long term, but we had to make it through the long we had to get to the long term to realize it. Um, but great learnings, and it got us this fantastic fan base, and then once we switched over to organic, and I mean, we put all of our muscle into that, we went to something like $12 for customer acquisition on an average spend of over $100. So,
That's
though
for the audience, those are that don't know, like, that's incredible, and also to know too that organic is incredibly difficult to do well, I think.
yeah.
So that's pretty great.
And we were able to do that really, really quickly, and I think that's what was so impressive about what our team was able to accomplish, was that was within the year that we were able to basically completely flip everything and get down to, like, a double-digit acquisition cost, and then it just went down from there, and that was really incredible, and the lifetime value only went up. So that was a really, sort of wild and incredible experience to go through because it did really feel like we were, moving at hyper speed, and then the pandemic hit. And it was like, we had no idea what was gonna happen. Office shut down. We all took pay cuts preemptively just to sort of batten down the hatches and make sure that we could keep powder dry so, like, everybody could stay employed even if it was at, a lower salary.
Oh, I love that. I just wanna pause there because not many companies would do that. So well done you because that's pretty impressive, I think.
It was, I think the thing that was really impressive to me was that, like, nobody balked at it. Nobody said, "Well, that's not fair," or,
It's a
"I
team.
can't do it. I don't wanna do it," or, everybody understood that, like, if we all just took it down, the exact same team would be available on the other side of this, whatever this was, right? At the time, we just had no clue.
Mhm.
And so it was this really wonderful example of the culture that had been created inside of our business, and something that I think we were all, from a leadership perspective, really, really proud of. Because I mean, truly, nobody was really exempt from it. Obviously, it was less for people who were making less. But it really felt like it was all hands on deck. We were banding together. I mean, we did like Zoom calls every morning. We did workouts together on Zoom.
Oh, I love that.
We were, like, really dedicated to being like, "We are maintaining this group, this culture, this team, like, we all just have to stick it out and stick together." So that was really beautiful, and, luckily, we were in a vice industry, so it absolutely boomed,
Yes.
during COVID when everybody was
What
sitting
else
at
are people
home.
gonna do? They're
Yeah,
stuck at
yeah,
home.
exactly, and, most places had, cannabis delivery, so nobody had to leave their
Gosh,
home
I didn't
and
even know that was a thing. Oh my goodness.
Oh, yes, big time.
And it
So,
makes sense. Then you don't have DUIs, so
yeah.
it's like you can just order it in, I guess.
Yes, it's perfect. And so I think for us, but just the ability for the team to sort of come together and say, whatever
Yes.
comes next, we're in it. And then for things to turn around and for everybody to be able to get back to standard pay,
Mhm.
for us to have never wavered on benefits or anything else. And then ultimately, that was what really kind of sent us into the
Mhm.
phase where we felt like, oh, we thought maybe in the beginning because there was so much acquisition activity inside of the cannabis industry happening, especially at that time. Like, yeah, there's a good chance that somebody could come sniffing around. If they do, maybe around year 3 or 4. Um, but we weren't focused on it. Like, we weren't building to try and get acquired. We were building because we knew that the industry needed a
Yes.
like, the consumers needed a product that was safe and beautiful and that was worthy of all
Mhm.
of this money that they were spending on the actual consumable product. So, that was our focus, and I think between that focus on what's the best experience for the customer,
Mhm.
addressing the needs of the industry, and ultimately, more than anything else, having the exact right people at the table who
Yes.
were dedicated to those exact same things. We were all pushing in the same direction. It just kind of all the stars aligned and fell into place where at the end of 2020, people really started kind of sniffing around and coming to talk to us when we were having meetings.
Mhm.
And then ultimately we sold, and it was a great experience. Like, it's not everybody gets that experience, and certainly a lot of our team members had never gone through it.
But you didn't build a
Um,
unicorn either. I mean, you built a
yeah,
solid business. And I wanna kinda call that out too because I think that that gets, overlooked all the time. Like, there's a ton of money to be made in the base hits or in the doubles. Like, it doesn't have to always be a home run, and, like, you can stack those doubles, and then now look where you are.
100%, and the ability to build a profitable business,
Yes.
right? Again, not to spend at all costs once you don't have to anymore, is I think about it like, what does that afford us to do as a leadership team? How
Right.
can we invest? Where else can we spend those dollars? How can we treat our customers better? How can we treat our team better? Right? Like, how do we build something that is really uh, sustainable in terms of like a flourishing business? Like, if we never sold this company,
Mhm.
could we enjoy working here? Could it be profitable? Is it still a meaningful company in terms of how customers receive our message and our product? I think the answer is yes. That's what we built, and ultimately, I think that's why we got the multiple that we did.
Mhm.
Um, And so, it was a great experience for the whole team.
Mhm.
And then we are this small, tight-knit, tiny little team, and then we are thrown over the fence to a public company,
Yep.
international, based down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, but we had a grow operation in Colombia, in, like, the mountains in Colombia. We had a 70-person team in Bogota. We had
Oh
we
my
had our
gosh.
team here.
You
Um,
weren't doing the morning workouts anymore, or were you still doing those? It's like, those were done.
well, you know what? Actually, our first, like, big company-wide meeting that we hosted, we, like, flew people in from Bogota, we flew people in from we had ju they acquired another company, like, right
Okay.
after us.
Yes.
Um, we brought their leadership in, all of us from Vessel went out, and the first thing that we did on the first day was get everybody outside in, like, the beautiful Miami sun
Yes.
and, like, do a little bit of, like, working out, stretching, getting the blood flowing. All of us worked in sports previously, so to us, it's, like, pretty core that
Yeah.
like, it's what you do, right? Like, sweating is
I
bonding.
actually just read something about that where it was like the somatic nervous system or something. Like if you have like even like ADHD or something like that, like sometimes like you have to move, and if you move, then it helps like calm your mind down a little bit, which was really interesting. So anyway, for what it's worth,
Yeah. Really, and, like, gain some clarity and,
makes
breathing
sense.
heavy gets the oxygen flowing, so, yes, we sort of we weren't doing it as formally as we were during, like, the height of the
I
pandemic when we
love
were
that
all at
though.
home on Zoom, but it was always something that we were, kind of messing around with and something that we've always incorporated, I feel like. Um so yeah, so we got everybody together and anyway, got thrown over the fence and it was I came in as chief marketing officer.
Hmm.
And it was a whole collection of brands that we were walking into in addition to our brand. We acquired another brand about 3 months after our acquisition. We also had the public markets pressures. We also had a cultivation arm. There's also a pharmaceutical arm, right? We were really addressing the entire breadth of the cannabis
Yes.
industry in this business.
Hmm.
And it was my job as chief marketing officer to not only work closely with James, who's our chief brand officer, to make sure that like the actual house of brands was functioning and flowing and it was clear
Yep.
and concise and all of that good stuff. But that the messaging around the entire business
Hmm.
made sense, was clear, and not only externally, although a lot of my job was, investor relations. It was
Sure.
probably 70% of my job was just talking to people all day long about what we were doing. But also internally, right? We had this like hyper diverse and dispersed team and it was so much of my time was spent making sure that people really understood the why behind the decisions that were being made. That, we really tried not to make decisions in a vacuum or just at the leadership level, that there were conversations that would happen company wide to really understand all of the dynamics that were at play before a decision was made. And then once a decision was made, could we then clearly communicate that back to the team members so they understood what was happening?
Yeah.
And it was really a lot of this was so simple. Like the first thing
Hmm.
I did when I came in, our first earnings call, I kind of sat back and listened in, because it was just maybe a month and a half after I had been appointed.
Hmm.
I was like, "We are never again doing conference call earnings calls." Especially when we had like we were a nano stock, we were tiny, but we had thousands of retail investors who were invested in
Yes.
us, and I was like, Who is this for?" Like, where is this landing?" I was like, "The people who have invested in us, including the time that our employees have invested in us, deserve
Yes.
to see the faces of the people who are leading this company." So
Mm.
we immediately switched to, doing more like Zoom style
Yes. Yeah.
earnings.
I love that. Well, it's all about the experience, which ties
Right.
back to your role. It's why you're the chief experience officer.
Yeah, but and it was little things like that, having conversations with people that, were already in our business or who were advising our business or outside of our business, doing these sort of like industry state of plays that we put out not only externally, but internally as well, just so that people really understood the intent of what was going on, and provide some clarity and transparency in an industry that is sort of notoriously opaque.
Mhm.
And I think if I could put a feather in my cap, I think that would be, what I'm most proud of with my time there, was that certainly was not the norm back in 2021, 22, 23 when we were doing, video,
Mhm.
earning calls and doing all of these, just open kind of
Right.
Q&A style sessions with, you know, former regulators and industry experts and all of that. So, um, yeah, I think that, it was weird. It's weird to work in public markets. It's strange. It's its own beast. I'm so grateful for the experience, but ultimately I feel like what I learned was the playbook that we had in terms of building not only a functioning business in investment and other ventures, but the culture that that informs and
Mhm.
ultimately how that manifests into how we tell our story, who we tell our story to, and how we deliver on all those promises that we're making, like, that
Mhm.
works. Whether you're in a company of 2 people or you're in a multinational
Yeah.
public company, that those tenets still remain true if you stick to them and you use them really as your North Star. So, that was
I
the
love
best learned tip that I got.
I mean, that's so invaluable, and I really appreciate you sharing that because I think the communication piece is tough sometimes for founders because you're so excited about what you're building and you're in it that and you get it. You know, this is what I'm building, but it's hard to look outward and for the external stakeholders to your point, how do we communicate this so there's value for them? So that's really well said.
Yeah, and it's still I still struggle
So
with it
hard.
because you get so excited. You're like,
Yeah, I mean, I do too. I think that's why we hit it off because it's like, yeah, but like, okay, deep breath, like, all right, now I have to be stoic. Maybe not all the way stoic, but a little bit stoic.
a little bit."
Okay, so for the sake of this, we always keep these a little bit shorter. So I wanted to kind of wrap it up. And is there anything that you want to add, either about the thoughtful company, about your own story that we haven't touched on today?
You know, uh, I guess if I would add one thing, uh, the all of the time that I've spent in all of these different businesses, whether they're my own or someone else's, the thing that has made it the most impactful in my life, the most meaningful, the most worthwhile in terms of how I spend my time, has always been the people. And I can't stress enough when I talk to other founders or people who feel like they're cogs in a wheel sometimes that the people that you work with, the people that you spend your time with, the way that you can collaborate with those people, is the only way that you really truly make something meaningful. It has almost nothing to do with the idea and everything to do with the brains that are thinking about it.
Hmm.
Um, and so if that's one thing I could pass along to anybody is just find the right people, and when you find them, you hold on for
Don't let
dear life.
go. Go work out. Now I want to start workout sessions like with our team. I'm like, oh, let's do. I mean, obviously it's not mandatory, but like, hey, let's do it.
Right, it's great even if it's like a 10-minute, like, morning stretch,
Or
just,
we
like,
go
wake
walk
up
together
everybody.
too, like, "Let's go walk and talk." I don't know, that's amazing, I love that. We always end with, "What are you currently reading?" So I'm interested.
Well, so I am sort of recommitting to reading. Actually, it's funny because I did not know you were gonna ask the question, but I do have it sitting right here.
I usually make it like "Oh, it's the Daily Stoic, that's perfect." Oh my gosh, we did not
Yeah.
plan this, I'd like to say.
I no, I listen to the podcast every morning, and I'm just like, there's just something about holding the book and sitting with it and reading it and really thinking about it, and internalizing some of those lessons that again, you talk about transcending businesses with a playbook that works. It's a playbook that works, it's transcended centuries, right? Like, so I'm really enjoying revisiting this again. So that's what I'm reading.
That's perfect. Well, we couldn't get a better like a more perfect ending. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'll put all the links in the description like I normally do. If you want to reach out to Jessie, please do follow her on LinkedIn. Check out the Thoughtful Company. She and James are going to be building some really cool things. I'm looking forward to how you're going to change up that industry in particular. So thank you for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Molly. I loved it. This is great.